great Labor candidates, Labor members get into Parliament. Thank you.
Order. In accordance with Standing Order 43, the time for members' statements has concluded. I advise the House that the Deputy Speaker has fixed 3:30 p.m. until 4 p.m. today for the next sitting of the Federation Chamber. Questions without notice. Are there any questions? And I give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Before the election, the Prime Minister promised cheaper electricity prices, cheaper gas prices and cheaper mortgages. Since the election, the Prime Minister has mentioned nothing in relation to those promises. Instead, your actions have delivered the opposite. Now, to make a bad situation worse, you're imposing a job-destroying industrial relations system at exactly the wrong time for our economy. Why, like Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, does this Prime Minister get every economic call wrong?
Give the call to the Prime Minister. The Minister for Skills.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his first question in 3 days and congratulate him on getting that decision through his Tactics Committee. I did think that I know Matthew Guy wants him to have a vow of silence. And
Manager
he's
of
not
Opposition
welcome.
Business.
He's not welcome in Victoria, but I welcome the Leader of the Opposition here to ask a question about industrial relations, because his deputy said yesterday, said it a couple of times, we think the entire bill is terrible. That is their position on industrial relations. The entire bill is terrible. Well, let's have a look at what they say is terrible in the legislation. Putting gender equity and job security at the heart of the Fair Work Commission's decision-making. Putting it in the objectives of the Act, they say that's terrible. Banning pay secrecy clauses, a tool which has been used to hold down women's pay in particular. That's terrible as well. Giving the Commission the expertise and the powers to end the historic inequality between the pay and conditions in female-dominated care and community sectors and the pay and conditions enjoyed by the rest of the workforce. They say that's terrible as well. Expanding access to flexible work arrangements,
Leader of the Opposition,
particularly for women. They say that's terrible as well, especially prohibiting sexual harassment in the Fair Work Act. They say that's terrible as well. Placing new limits on rolling fixed-term contracts so workers can't be effectively put on an endless probation period where they have no security whatsoever. That's terrible as well. Bolstering the ability of workers to recover unpaid entitlements. They say that's terrible as well. Banning job ads that advertise for below the relevant minimum pay rate. Do they support that? No, they say that's terrible. Strengthening anti-sham contracting laws. Do they support that? No. They say, guess what? That's terrible as well. Reforming the Better Off Overall test so that it's simple, flexible and fairer for both workers and for business. They say it's terrible as well. The same mob that said a $1 an hour pay increase for people on the minimum wage was reckless and dangerous, lecturing us about industrial relations. Well, we on this side of the House stand for increased productivity, stand for supporting business, but we also stand for supporting workers' wages.
Well, there is far too much noise in the chamber. The member for Longman will not speak while I'm speaking. I give the call to the member for Bruce.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. In light of today's reports about previous contracting and tendering processes in Services Australia and the NDIS, what is the Albanese Labor government doing to ensure federal government contracts are allocated in a proper manner that will ensure transparency for the Australian people?
Order. Members on my right. The Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme will take a seat for a moment. I will hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, on the point of order goes to the proper content of the question. A minister can be asked about matters for which the minister is responsible in public administration, but not about the practice of the previous government, which is expressly what this question went to.
I'll hear from the Leader of the House. Order.
Thanks very much, Mr. Speaker. To the point of order, I don't know how this one could be out of order and any of the questions asked by the opposition could ever be in order. This question refers to media reports of the day, which practice specifically says can be referred to in questions, and then asks specifically about what actions the Albanese Labor government is taking. They're the terms of the question.
Practice does say on 557 regarding media reports, and the minister can answer questions on Standing Order 98 regarding public affairs and administration. The question does contain his portfolio and how it impacts on his portfolio. It's in order, and I'll give him the call.
The Age and Sydney Morning Herald have today reported that the member for Fadden used his status as a federal MP in 2017 and 2018 to help the lobbying and consulting firm Synergy 360 to help them sign up corporate clients with the promise of helping them navigate the federal public service and political system and meet key decision-makers, including senior coalition ministers. Specifically, it was reported that emails reveal that Synergy 360 would frequently update corporate clients as to the progress in lobbying and providing access to senior government figures for the allocating and rewarding of several multi-million-dollar contracts. And Mr David Milo is Synergy 360's CEO. A major shareholder of Synergy 360 is a Mr John Mardrason. Mr Mardrason is a former business partner of the member for Fadden. Mr Mardrason has also run the member for Fadden's political fundraising vehicle. The member for Fadden has previously been a director of a separate business of Mr Mardrason. Strangely, though, a search of the Federal Lobbyist Register reveals, however, that Synergy 360 is not a registered lobbyist.
The minister will pause. I'm listening carefully to the minister. Member for Fadden will cease interjecting while I take a point of order from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Mr Speaker, practice is very clear about personal reflections on other members of the House, and it also is very clear on
members on my right.
Very clear on page 515 that members can only direct a charge against other members or reflect upon their character or conduct upon a substantive motion which admits of a distinctive vote of the House. So practice is very clear on this. What the minister is doing is out of order.
The minister is setting context to order. I am going to ask him to relate the question regarding the part of his portfolio. He has set the context. Order. The member for Page. And I bring him back to the question.
The leaked emails reveal that Synergy 360 was lobbying for corporations in relation to lucrative government contracts, including in the portfolios I'm now responsible for. Therefore, this morning, I have asked the CEO of Services Australia and the CEO of the National Disability Insurance Agency to immediately and thoroughly investigate any of the contracts awarded to these companies and individuals named in these reports, to assure me and the Australian people that the process was entirely above board and appropriate. And in conclusion, I just want to say to Australians listening to this, the Albanese government believes that the job of an MP is to work for your constituents, not your former business partners. Further, we believe that when there is clear lobbying, as revealed by the emails, companies are required to be on the lobbyist register. This is not an option. But most importantly, using public office as a politician to enrich your private friends and mates, including political donors, is not a shade of grey. Whether you are a backbencher or a frontbencher is not a defence. If and when public office has been used to enrich private mates, it is corruption.
The member for Bass has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Minister, under Labor's extreme industrial relations changes, small and medium businesses will need to pay between $14,000 and $75,000 when dragged into compulsory multi-employer bargaining. Given small and family businesses are already facing higher interest repayments and rising energy prices, can the minister inform the House what financial assistance the government will provide to these Australian businesses to help them meet these new costs?
Give the call to the Minister for Small Business, Housing and Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Bass for her question. There's no doubt, and I've said in this place, that small businesses have been doing it tough. They are dealing with rising, increased
Members
prices,
on my left.
and they are doing it tough in terms of increased mortgages and increased energy prices. But what we're doing in terms of the better pay secure jobs is what we're doing is we're trying to actually support small businesses and give them what they want. What we're doing here is giving them access to enterprise bargaining that will improve
The Leader of the Nationals will
productivity,
cease interjecting.
that will improve productivity and give businesses the benefit of negotiating with their employees. And indeed, when you go to the regulatory impact statement, Mr Speaker, and you do keep reading, it says, and I'm going to quote from it, Mr Speaker, it says, "The significant benefits of being covered by an enterprise agreement and the costs that may be associated with remaining covered by a modern award outweigh the additional costs for businesses to engage in the new multi-employer bargaining streams." Not to mention, Mr Speaker, that most small businesses will go into the cooperative stream, where they'll be able to get off-the-shelf type products, and it will cost them very, very little, and that's where we think most small businesses will go.
Order. When the House comes to order, the member for Moncrieff will cease interjecting. It's far too much noise. I want to be very clear with the House. There must be silence when questions are being asked. Ministers are entitled to answer questions in silence as well. I'm not mucking around today. I'll give the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government working with investors to address some of the nation's big economic challenges?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Speaker, for the call, and thanks to the member for Bendigo for her second question this week. She's now asked as many questions in 4 days as the member for Humes asked me in more than 4 weeks. Mr Speaker,
Members on my left. Treasurer has the call and will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When we have our fair share of economic challenges, and we have our
Member
fair share,
Petrie is warned.
when we have our fair share of economic challenges in this country, and we have our fair share of constraints on the budget, it's more important than ever that governments work with investors in our economy to try and satisfy some of our big national economic objectives. And there are ways that we can do that to ensure that investors get good returns for their investors and for their members when it comes to super funds, at the same time as we do address some of the big economic challenges which have been left unattended for too long in this country. And that's why tomorrow, for the first time, the Treasurer's Investor Roundtable will be convened in Sydney. And what the Investor Roundtable will do, it will bring together the 4 big banks, Macquarie, the industry funds, the retail funds, BlackRock and Blackbird, the Future Fund, representatives of the state treasurers and others, to begin to deal with and take advantage of some of the big challenges and opportunities that are in our economy right now. And around the table in Sydney tomorrow, there will be trillions of dollars of funds under management ready to find ways to get good returns at the same time as we address some of these challenges. And the first order of business tomorrow will be the government's housing accord. And I pay tribute to the Housing Minister for her work on the housing accord as part of our broader sweep of housing policies, which are so important to dealing with one of the biggest economic challenges we have around housing affordability. And the challenge is, when it comes to this particular part of the housing market that the housing accord will address, is when we've got low unemployment in this country, we need to make it easier for people to live near where the jobs and opportunities are being created. At a time of low vacancy rates and high rents, we need to make it easier. And so I welcome the interests of the big investors in this country, super funds, institutional investors, the banks and others, as we try and work together and come together to deal with this big economic challenge. And if we make progress here, and I'm confident that we will, there's nothing preventing us from turning to some of the other challenges in our economy, whether it's the energy challenges in energy markets which have been left to us, whether it's challenges in data or digital, whether it's recognising the opportunities in critical minerals and advanced manufacturing. There's a big opportunity here, Big investors in this country want to work with the government wants to work with them, and we'll be getting on with it.
Before I call the member for Griffith, I'd like to inform the House that present in the gallery today are representatives from the Queensland Parliament. On behalf of the House, I welcome the Honourable Curtis Pitt, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, the Honourable John Paul Lambrook, Shadow Minister for Seniors, Communities and Disability Services, and Dr Christian Rowan, the Shadow Minister for Education, Shadow Minister and the Arts. A very warm welcome. Give the call to the member for Griffith.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. Minister, you have previously said you supported Australia exporting coal beyond 2050, and this week the boss of the Oil and Gas Corporation fracking the giant climate bomb in the Northern Territory's Beetaloo Basin said they would be able to pump gas for, quote, hundreds of years. Minister, does the government still support exporting coal beyond the middle of this century, and do you support the pumping of gas for hundreds of years?
I give the call to the Minister for Resources.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Griffith for his question. The truth is, and the Prime Minister said this and this government has always said this, the decision about whether coal will be bought or exported from this country and bought by others, we made in boardrooms right around the world, but particularly in North Asia. It won't necessarily be made by us. This is an export industry that indeed has been operating in this country since, I believe, 1801. Yeah. This is a long-term industry that supports tens of thousands of people and communities right up and down the East Coast, and to disregard them, as you tend to do, Member for Griffith and your comrades, is disingenuous to those communities. Exactly. And I think
Order. The Minister of Resources will just pause on the. I'll hear from the member for Griffith on a point of order.
Just on relevance, Mr Speaker, just trying to find out if the government supports exporting coal, not baseless accusations about the Greens' policy on coal and gas.
That is not a point of order or how a point of order should be taken. Because the member is new, I will let that one slide. The minister is being relevant. It is not an opportunity to restate a question or to make another statement. Give the call back to the minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was just pointing out to the member for Griffith the history of this country and the very important export industry of this country, and it will remain a future export industry of this country. The member would do well, along again with his friends and colleagues, to maybe visit some of the communities up and down the East Coast so they could see exactly the hard work that goes into the coal export industry. We have members here, the member for Hunter, indeed, that was a former coal miner and worked in the coal industry. I've been down a Longwall coal mine with him, and I can see the very hard work and the communities this supports. As for gas exports in this country are very important to this country, not only to towns like Karratha and Onslow and Broome, indeed Darwin. They are also very important to our regional neighbours. We know that countries across North Asia depend upon Australia for their energy security. This country will remain a reliable and trustworthy supplier of energy to our Asian neighbours and to our region for as long as we need to be.
Give a call to the member for Lyons.
Thank you, Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister. This week marks the 6th-month anniversary of the Albanese Labor government. What has the government achieved in that time?
Give a call. Order. Order. Members on my left. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lyons.
Order. The Prime Minister reports. There is far too much noise. There is far too much noise. The question was heard in silence. The Prime Minister will be heard in silence. When the House comes to order, the member for Deakin is warned. Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Lyons for that insightful question, and I do say that 6 months ago this week, I stood at the Canterbury Helston Park RSL and I promised that after a wasted decade this government wouldn't waste a day, and we haven't. From day one we've got on with the job of building a better future for Australians, the better future that Australians voted for. One of the first things we did was to put in a submission to the Fair Work Commission that led to the increase in the minimum wage to keep up with a 5.1% inflation rate. The Fair Work Commission granted 5.2%, and we welcome that. We put in a submission for a pay rise for aged care workers, something that those opposite failed to do during their decade in office. We've already passed legislation to make childcare cheaper this week, making a difference for over 1 million Australian families. We've passed legislation to make medicines cheaper, the first time in 75 years of the PBS that medicines have actually been made cheaper. We've created 180,000 new fee-free tape places will be in place from January 1 next year. We've established 10 days paid domestic and family violence leave, something that those opposite when they were in government said would create a perverse disincentive to employ women. That was the attitude of those opposite. We have got it done. We've convened a Jobs and Skills Summit, which we brought together business and unions and civil society to engage constructively. We've established the Housing Accord, again bringing together business, including the MBA, with unions, with state and territory governments to deliver more affordable housing and to boost construction. We've ended the cashless debit card. We've expanded the Commonwealth Seniors Health Card.
Order.
We've established the Royal Commission into robo-debt. We've delivered the regional first home buyers guarantee. We've passed our climate change bill and rejoined the world effort to tackle climate change. We're advancing a voice to Parliament and constitutional recognition. We've set about repairing our international relations that have been trashed by those opposite. And in these final weeks, there's more to do. Today, very hopeful that we will pass through this House the legislation to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission. I can understand why it didn't happen under the previous decade of the former government. And we are making sure that we put in place measures to get wages moving so that we take pressure off people who are doing it tough. This is just in our first 6 months. I look forward to the next 6 months and well beyond.
Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Small Business, and I refer to the flood-hit town of Eugowra, which the Prime Minister visited this week, and the flood-hit town of Moama in my electorate of Farrer. If a small business in Eugowra or Moama is rebuilding next year, will they be able to specifically access the regional small business support program?
The call to the Minister for Small Business, Minister for Housing and Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for her question. We are, of course, concerned by communities that have been impacted by floods. We know they have been doing it incredibly tough, which is why we did move as quickly as we could to make sure that assistance was available for those communities. Indeed, we're investing $1 billion over 5 years to mitigate potential disasters and loss and damage through the government's new Disaster Ready Fund. We are concerned about it. And we have also, of course, moved in each of the states that have recently had floods, in Tasmania, in Victoria and in New South Wales, to make small business grants available for those communities, Mr Speaker.
The Minister is 30 seconds into her question, answering the question. I'm going to ask her, out of respect for the Deputy Leader of the Opposition's position, I'm allowing this point of order, but I want to have it stated clearly what the point of order is.
The point of order is on relevance because I referred specifically to a program called the Regional Small Business Support Program.
Yeah. You resume your seat. The minister is 40 seconds in. Order. I'd like to hear the minister in silence. The Deputy Leader was heard in silence. She's 40 seconds in. She's got 3 minutes to answer the question. I'm going to give her the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And we have been moving to support small businesses. As I said in this place earlier in the week, we have also moved to make sure that programs that were due to end at the end of this year, on the 31st of December, that those opposite didn't continue to fund, about mental health and wellbeing and, of course, the small business debt hotline, that we're not continuing. We found more than $10 million in the last budget to make sure that those programs could continue. We're looking at all of the programs to make sure that we are supporting small businesses in every way possible to come out of the floods, and will continue to do so, Mr Speaker.
Give the call to order. I give the call to the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Attorney-General. Why is it important that standards of integrity be raised to improve voters' trust in our democratic system?
Good question.
I'll give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Spence for his question. The National Anti-Corruption Commission is a landmark reform which I hope will have a profound impact on our democracy once it is established. The Commission will not just investigate corruption after it happens, but will seek to prevent corruption as far as is possible. The Commission will be tasked with education and prevention functions. The Commission will provide guidance and information to support the public sector to identify and address vulnerabilities to corruption. It will educate the public sector and raise awareness of corruption risks and how to avoid them. The Commission has the capacity to hold public hearings, and when findings of corruption are made, the Commission will be able to release public reports. This visibility is important and will ensure the Australian public will see the Commission doing its job. Trust in government hit an all-time low in the most recent Australian election study conducted by the Australian National University in 2019. Only 59% of Australians were satisfied with how their democracy is working. There's no doubt Australians at the 2022 election felt the same way. Something was broken and they wanted it fixed. The Albanese Labor government heard that call, and the National Anti-Corruption Commission bills are our answer. The main bill to establish the Commission passed this House just before question time. Our sincere hope is that the Commission will help to restore trust in federal politics. Australians will know that there is a strong watchdog with teeth, ensuring that those who are fortunate enough to be elected to this place are not misusing their position for personal gain. Nothing is more important than ensuring our behaviour in this place upholds the bond of trust with Australians. That bond is the basis of our democracy. There's been much damage done in the last decade to that bond. Just one example of that is the promise made in December 2018 to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission, which was never delivered. The bills currently before the Parliament to establish a National Anti-Corruption Commission are the first steps in that repair job. It is up to all members in both houses to do the right thing, come together and pass the bills before Parliament. Let's send a strong message to all Australians that we can get this job done.
Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Agriculture. I refer to a Northern Australian family cattle property that employs 21 ringers and station hands. Under Labor's industrial relations changes, if a representative for cattle ringers and station hands from that property successfully applies to the Fair Work Commission to bargain a single-interest employer agreement, could all similar family cattle properties in Northern Australia be forced into multiple employer bargaining?
Give the call to the Leader of the House. I've given the call to the Leader of the House.
I'm happy to start.
The manager will resume his seat. I don't know what the Leader is going to say, but I've given him the call because he was on his feet. So when someone jumps up, as I give you the call all the time, I give the call to the Leader of the House. Order. Members on my right.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Just on a point of order, the question goes specifically to the interaction of businesses with a piece of legislation that is entirely within a different portfolio. Happens to be mine, but this question is directed to the wrong minister.
I'll hear from the manager.
On the point of order, Mr Speaker, it's very clear that what this goes to is the impact on businesses within the sector for which the minister representing the Minister for Agriculture is responsible, and that is why she is the appropriate minister to be asked this question and to answer it.
This issue has come up a couple of times this week. Practice makes it clear where a question may involve, on page 549, may involve the responsibility of more than one minister, should be directed to the minister most responsible. However, a minister may direct the question without question, may direct her answer or his answer without question. So I'll allow the minister to give. I'll allow the minister under the standing orders to answer the question, and then another minister may respond as well.
Thanks very much. I'm very proud that in the Albanese's government's first budget, $1 billion has been put into the agriculture sector to make sure that we're actually growing that sector and making sure that we're protecting it from the biosecurity threats that we've seen with foot and mouth disease and lumpy skin disease. Of course, the specific question that the minister asks, as he knows full well, is an industrial relations question, so I will refer that question to the Industrial Relations Minister to answer.
The Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. Trying to get questions. First of all, the example that they've asked, that they've given, the example that they've given, as I heard it, refers to a single employer making an application with respect to the single interest stream. A single employer can't make an application to the single interest stream. It starts with multiple employers. That's the way it works. But I have to say, if the question is wanting to go to the broader point of are these rules meant to be able to reach agriculture, yeah, absolutely. Because those opposite presided over a time when horticulture workers were being paid $4 an hour. Those opposite on my left presided over a time when some of the worst examples of wage theft were coming from that exact sector, not because of the farmers themselves, but because of the labour hire.
The Leader of the Nationals will cease interjecting.
Rorting the systems where the farmers thought they were paying for decent wages, they were being charged for them, but there was a rort happening that was never meeting the worker. Now, I met with workers. I remember meeting Kate on a visa here from Taiwan, who was fishing out of the bins beside the supermarkets to get food, and she had a full-time job because that's what was happening under the laws of those opposite. So when the Prime Minister before gave the example that this Act that's being proposed by the government, the amendments to the Fair Work Act, will make it that you can no longer advertise work for less than the legal minimum rate of pay, you bet we're in favour of that. And you bet that'll get in the way of some of the rorts that have been happening. You should be representing all the people in your electorate, including the workers who've been underpaid.
Has the Minister concluded his answer? Has the Minister concluded his answer? Order. The Leader of the Nationals will resume his seat and remain silent for the rest of question time. Or will not be here for question time. Order. Members on my right, the Treasurer is not helping. The Treasurer will cease interjecting. As I'd like to hear from the member for Hume, so I can hear the member for Newcastle and her question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. What is the government's response to the—
Order. The member for Newcastle will resume her seat. I have made it Member for Hume, you're warned. I've made it crystal clear I want to hear questions in silence. You're refusing to follow my direction and you keep constantly interjecting. Has everyone got the message? Give the call to the member for Newcastle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Environment and Water. And what's the government's response to the terrible destruction of the Juukan Gorge, and how will the government make sure that this never happens again?
Give a call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Newcastle, who I know has spent a lot of time over the years in remote communities, for her question. Today, the government formally tabled our response to the interim and final reports by the Joint Select Committee on Northern Australia into the destruction of Juukan Gorge. We are so fortunate to share this continent with the world's oldest continuous culture and most successful environmental custodians, and Juukan Gorge is one of the oldest sites of human occupation in Australia, with 46,000 years of continuous culture, tradition, practices and stories. As I said this morning, it is unthinkable that any culture would knowingly destroy Stonehenge or the Egyptian pyramids or the Lascaux caves in France. And when the Bamiyan Buddhas were destroyed in Afghanistan, the world was rightly outraged. But that's precisely what occurred in Juukan Gorge. I want to thank all members of parliament who participated in the 2 inquiries across the political spectrum and produced 2 very thoughtful reports. A particular debt of gratitude is owed to the Butu, Gunti, Guruma and Binigura people, who are the traditional owners of Juukan Gorge, and I am truly sorry about the loss you have experienced and the way the parliamentary inquiries and government response have added to your distress. What's clear from these reports is that our system is not working, which is why at the election the Labor Party promised to reform the system with a standalone piece of Indigenous cultural heritage legislation co-designed with First Nations people. That was our commitment, and today, in signing an agreement with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance, we took the first step in that journey. Mr Speaker, the final committee report identified 8 recommendations for reforming Australia's cultural heritage protections, and we have accepted 7 of them, and we are continuing to work through one recommendation, which is whether the ultimate responsibility for cultural heritage should sit with the Indigenous Affairs Minister or the Environment Minister. Mr Speaker, these are serious reports, and the recommendations speak to the principles and priorities that will shape our response. Free, prior and informed consent, truth-telling and open dialogue, genuine partnership, the kind that can only be entered into by equals. This morning, our government signed an agreement with the First Nations Heritage Protection Alliance. The alliance will work closely with Minister Burney and Senator Dodson and the rest of us to make sure that we get these laws right. We are always a better country, more unified, more confident, more secure in ourselves when we give everyone a seat at the table, when we listen to all voices. We are committed to doing better in true partnership with First Nations Australians.
Give the call to the member for order. Members on my right. Well, I haven't given you the call yet. I haven't given you the call. Order. The House will come. You don't have the call. So just when the House comes to order, you'll get the call, and I give the member order. The member for Bruce is warned. Give the call. I give the call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Minister for Small Business. A Canberra small business owner has told 9 News he's worried that the government's industrial relations changes will mean he has to increase prices. He said it just means that the prices of your schooner, your pints and your palmies are going to go up. Will the minister guarantee that small businesses will not have to increase prices as a result of Labor's extreme industrial relations changes?
Order. I give the call to the Minister for Small Business, Homelessness and Housing.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. Small businesses, as I said, have been doing it tough, and we do know that they are facing rising increases in their costs. We do know that they are dealing with rising energy prices and that they are dealing with rising interest rates. We also know, of course, that they are having trouble attracting staff. We know that there are massive staff shortages, which is why we're also moving in terms of increasing skilled migration, in terms of increasing fee-free TAFE places, to make sure that we have the workforce available for small businesses, Mr Speaker. We're also, Mr Speaker, of course, we are changing industrial relations laws to make it easier, simpler and cheaper for small businesses to be able to engage in enterprise bargaining. That is what we are doing. We want to make sure that small businesses get the benefits for the productivity increases that come from bargaining with their employees. That is what the Secure Jobs Better Pay is all about. It's also about making sure that the workers in these positions are able to get their first pay rise in almost a decade.
Has the minister concluded her answer? She's concluded her answer. The order. The member for Wills has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for International Development and the Pacific. How is the Albanese Labor government changing Australia's approach to engagement with Pacific nations on climate change, and what previous approaches are being changed?
The call to the Minister for Defence Industry and the Minister for International Development and the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wills for his question and his ongoing commitment to fighting climate change and his deep commitment to national security. Mr Speaker, nothing is more central to the security and well-being of the Pacific than taking action on climate change. and that's because the Pacific is bearing the brunt of climate change. In Australia, we've seen bushfires, droughts and the current massive floods. In Pacific Island countries, we're seeing inundation, water contamination and threats to food security. And that's why the 2018 Boyd Declaration said that climate change remains the single greatest threat to the livelihood, security and well-being of the peoples of the Pacific. For example, Kiribatis main island, Tarawa, will lose 50% of its land mass by 2100 under current projections. And at COP27, Australia's response was really well received. I met with 10 Pacific leaders and ministers, including the Prime Ministers of Cook Islands and Tonga and the President of Palau. And the Secretary-General of the PIF said Australia is taking a new, refreshed approach to its relationship with the Pacific, and it's reinforcing that not just with words, but also with some solid, real action. We're working with the Pacific to deliver outcomes that reflect Pacific interests. We supported Pacific climate negotiators to be there and to progress a bid for climate COP in the Pacific. And after a decade of inaction, Australia is taking action at home and abroad. We're supporting the Pacific Climate Facility. We're providing $900 million worth of extra ODA to the Pacific with a real focus on climate change. And I was also asked, Mr Speaker, how the approach has changed from the last government. Well, the Albanese government has delivered more in 6 months than the last government did in 10 years. For example, we're not making jokes about climate change destroying Pacific Island countries. We're taking this existential threat seriously. We're not blowing up regional security and unity like the member for Cook did by blocking action on climate change at the 2019 PIF.
The Minister will resume his seat, and I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker,
Minister for the Environment.
The minister's answer offends against several provisions of the standing orders, but in particular on relevance you have previously directed a minister back to the question when he strayed and got into the record of the previous government.
Will resume his seat, and I'll hear from the Leader of the House.
Just to the point of order, in terms of the way the minister's answering this question, he's been quite specific about what the government's doing and what the government's not doing. Every part of it has been framed in terms of decisions being taken by the government and that he's taken as minister.
The question involved what is being changed. I'm going to ask the minister to make sure he is comparing and contrast to those changes to be relevant. I'll give him a call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And in contrast to the last government, which blocked climate action, which led to Fiji Prime Minister Bainimarama saying that the former Prime Minister's actions were insulting, condescending and would drive the Pacific to countries other than Australia, the new government is supporting action on climate change, is supporting the Pacific. Because, Mr Speaker, the opposition likes to claim they're strong on national security, but being weak on climate, being weak on the Pacific means they're weak on national security. And unfortunately, the opposition leader's attacks on climate action, his dog-whistling on COP, in particular on damage and loss, demonstrates that the opposition leader doesn't understand national security, isn't fit to lead this party and is definitely not fit to lead this nation.
I give the call to the member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. It is currently estimated there are over 20 million motor vehicles in Australia that are powered by internal combustion engines. These engines are running on some of the dirtiest petrol in the world. Given these petrol cars will still be on our roads for an average of 10 more years, please tell us when the Australian government will take action to ensure the quality of our petrol will meet international best standards.
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm very pleased to confirm to the honourable member that the government is currently, as we speak, consulting on fuel quality standards, particularly in relation to Euro 6. That process has begun. And that is a matter for the climate change portfolio, for those opposite who don't understand government arrangements. And the Minister for Transport and I are also working very closely together on the related matter of fuel efficiency standards, two separate programs, very closely related but quite separate in terms of their implementation. Fuel efficiency standards are those which encourage and require manufacturers to send electric vehicles to Australia and other low-emissions vehicles. Perhaps low-emissions vehicles and electric vehicles like utes, which do exist around the world, Mr Speaker, and are available in many countries around the world, not currently available in Australia because we lack fuel efficiency standards, Mr Speaker. As somebody who's driven an electric ute, I can confirm they do exist They do exist and they are available elsewhere, but because of 10 years of policy indolence, they're not available in Australia.
Order.
But the honourable member for North Sydney is quite right. As well, while that transition is occurring, there will be many internal combustion engines in Australia. It is important that our fuel efficiency standards are best practice and our fuel quality standards are best practice. This government is, at its first 6 months, has started the process of reviewing both. It is important that we consult with manufacturers, with motoring groups. I met with motoring groups, as did the Minister for Transport just yesterday, and talked about exactly these two matters in the normal consultative and methodological
Minister
method
will
of the
resume
government.
his seat. I hear the member for North Sydney on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, it's to the point of relevance. Sorry. I specifically asked about petrol quality, and with 3 out of 4 car sales in this country, second-hand vehicles, I'd really appreciate if the minister could give me an answer on petrol, please.
The minister is being relevant. He's about halfway through the answer, and I'll ask him to return to that part of the question before he is concluded, and I'll give him the call.
And in relation to the honourable member's exact question, I only began the consultation process a couple of weeks ago. It is important to allow people to have their say. That process is nearing its end. As soon as I've read through all the submissions and assessed all the evidence, I'll make a decision and announce it.
The call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations. How will the Secure Jobs, Better Pay Bill get wages moving for low-paid workers and help close the gender pay gap?
The call to the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts.
Thanks so much, and I thank the member for Reid for her question and for her strong commitment on getting wages moving, and in particular on closing the gender pay gap. We had a comment from only today from Senator Cash, where she said this legislation will do nothing to get wages moving. That's the claim: nothing to get wages moving. If I just go through some of the evidence that's there and some of the changes that are in this bill, ending pay secrecy clauses gets wages moving. Pay secrecy clauses have been used deliberately to prevent workers from finding out what other workers are earning. It has been used deliberately within workplaces where the men are earning more than the women. You end pay secrecy clauses, you have an impact on getting wages moving. Strengthening the rights to flexible work. In terms of getting wages moving, particularly when it comes to closing the gender pay gap, it should not be this way, but it is a reality in Australia still that women have a disproportionate share of caring responsibilities in this country, and that is what happens far more commonly. When you have a situation that you have at the moment, where when someone asks for flexible work, for example, that they can't do a roster change, which if they went ahead with would mean there was no one to pick up a 3-year-old from childcare or early childhood education at a particular time, and they say, I can't deal with it. At the moment, if the employer says no, they have no further right of recourse. And this leads women in that situation to insecure work and lower paid work. That's what happens. You make sure that people have stronger rights to flexible work, you help get wages moving. But multi-employer bargaining also helps get wages moving. And notwithstanding the comments from the member for Longman about this being the sort of bill that would be promoted by socialist and communist governments, I might remind him of that great socialist and communist who now heads the OECD, where the OECD has said multi-employer arrangements are necessary to negotiate targeted raises in female-dominated and low-paid sectors. The OECD has also said collective bargaining can be mobilised to negotiate wage increases and better working conditions and can represent a powerful tool in addressing the gender wage gap. Now, I don't know if he's now going to go home and check for a Matthias under the bed or something like that, the great communist who used to be the finance minister for this country. But the reality is what those opposite are opposing is they are opposing measures that close the gender pay gap.
The Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
They are opposing measures that get wages moving. And the businesses that those opposite keep wanting to deny, like early childhood education centres, small businesses. There's more than one. There's more than keep saying, oh, can you name an early childhood centre? The way they behaved on the Cheaper Childcare Bill.
Order. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Can the minister confirm that a small business specialising in importing and exporting, whose workforce includes 12 Australian-based employees and 8 workers overseas in an associated entity of that business, could be compelled into multi-employer bargaining under Labor's extreme industrial relations changes?
Order. Before I call the minister, that question was clearly directed to the minister but contains the responsibilities of another minister. But I'll give her the call, and if she wishes to transfer the question under practice, she is able to do so. I just want to remind members that it's very clear for ministers, whoever they are, to transfer answers to another minister. And I'll give her the call. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition is constantly interjecting. Order. Members on my right. By her position, which I respect, she is entitled to certain latitude, but that latitude is really pushing against the wall at the moment. And I give the minister the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for that question. Of course, as he well knows, it is the responsibility of the Workplace Relations Minister, but I would say, Mr Speaker, he well knows that more than 2 million businesses will be exempt from the provisions that they're so concerned about there in terms of the single interest stream bargaining provisions. More than 2 million businesses in Australia will be exempt from this provision, and I'm happy to hand over to the Minister for Workplace Relations in terms of this particular question.
Does the Minister for Employment, Workplace Relations and Minister for Arts give him the call?
I wish they'd direct them to me. Australian workplace laws covers Australian businesses and the people who are employed in Australia.
Give order. The Manager of Opposition Business, and give the call to the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. Minister, how does the Albanese Labor government budget deliver for regional Australia?
I give the call to the Minister for Regional Development.
Thank you very much, and I thank the member for Lingiari for the question. One of the largest electorates in the country, and her strong advocacy for Territorians is well noted across this parliament. Like 30% of all of this country, I live in the regions, and I love talking about the importance of the regions to our economy and to our nation. Our budget is delivering for regional Australia. In fact, there are 760 budget initiatives to boost our regional communities and industries. Unlike those opposite, we believe that our policies will increase jobs in the renewable energy sector across the regions. The regions will be able to access more secure housing, better connectivity and investment in local ideas. Those opposite thought all regional Australia needed was grant spending, but for 10 long years they shortchanged our regions. Because our regional programs need transparency, they need fairness and they need a level playing field. Because we all know that the North Sydney pool should not have received regional funding via a closed, invitation-only grant process. We know regional Australians deserve better than that, which is why we committed $1 billion towards 2 major regional programs which will be delivered in a fair and transparent way. In every country town I go to, students and families tell me that they need connectivity, which is why we are delivering $2.4 billion to the NBN, $656 million to improve mobile coverage in rural and remote areas. But we also know that regional Australia is hamstrung by housing. The chef, the childcare worker, fruit pickers all need a roof over their head before they can take up a job in our region. That's why this government has taken up the challenge. Through our $10 billion Future Housing Fund, we know will make a huge difference. Over 1,000 regional Australians have already taken advantage of the Regional First Home Buyer Guarantee. We are also giving regional Australians priority access to 20,000 additional Commonwealth-supported university places, $158.5 million worth of measures to address teacher shortages in our regions. But good regional development isn't just about investing in our roads and our infrastructure. It's about investing in our people through skills and training. It's about investing in our services like NDIS, like Medicare, and early childhood education. And we know regional Australia has borne the brunt of natural disasters, which is why we are investing $200 million per year through the Disaster Ready Fund. Our communities need our help, which is why regional Australia is at the centre of the nation's growth and at the forefront of our agenda. We are committed to delivering a better future for all Australia, no matter where you live, no matter your postcode, leaving no one behind, and only the Albanese government will deliver that.
Before I call the member for Kennedy, and he will get the call, I'd just like to acknowledge in the gallery also we have the Honourable Dave Kelly, the Minister for Water, Forestry and Youth from the West Australian Parliament, and the Honourable Consul-General of Italy for Queensland and the Northern Territory, Ms Luna Angelini Matarucci. A very well welcome to you all. And can I call the member for Kennedy?
Resources in Northern Australia. Minister, would you agree that 92% of Australia, which is only 1.2 million people, is an area bleeding? 3/4 of Australia's water is in North Queensland's inland, not its coast. HIPCO's Hughenden Dam templates 13 schemes, each worth $300 million a year. Why not HIPCO Dam now, Minister?
Can we call to the Minister for Resources?
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Kennedy for his question. I do note the question goes to water infrastructure, which is a shared. No, I will get to your. I know what you're getting at, member for Kennedy. It also has intersections with the Minister for Infrastructure, and equally the Minister for the Environment and Water. But also, of course, as you pointed out, this has a lot to do with northern development in Northern Australia, so I'm more than happy to answer that question as best I can. As for the statistics you mentioned in the question, I am not sure about that, but I'm really happy to take that away and look at it and get back to your office. But you have mentioned HIPCO and the Hughenden Dam, and I note your long-standing concern around water securities right across Queensland, and especially in your seat of Kennedy. And it is appropriate there is water security for that region. I entirely agree with the member in that regard. You have had a long interest in the Hughenden irrigation scheme, and so have many members in this place. As you'd be aware, funding for that scheme does remain in the budget. However, there are a number of steps to be taken. A sufficient water allocation must be obtained from the Queensland Government, and I understand this is a process that Government is undertaking right now and with vigour. Also, Infrastructure Australia, which of course is the Minister for Infrastructure's responsibility, will be assessing the business case in relation to the Hughenden Dam. We are, as always, as a government, happy to engage with any member of this parliament on any of their requests for water infrastructure and other infrastructure, particularly those in the Northern Australia seats, on any project they think has value and can add to the economic and social development of the North. I'm really happy. As you know, a member for Kennedy, we have spoken on many times on many of the projects that are of benefit to Northern Australia, and I know all relevant ministers will continue to do the same. This government is more than happy to engage actively and look at projects that are brought forward, but they do need to be supported by a proper business case, and they really need to be engaged with the state and territory governments involved, because governments need to work together to make projects like the Hughenden irrigation project, the HIPCO project, go ahead. And I thank the member for Kennedy again for his question.
The Minister has concluded her answer. Is it relating to the question or something else?
I don't want it to be interpreted that I've bypassed the brilliant and gracious lady who is the Minister for Water. But I just think it's more northern development, that's all.
I thank the member for Kennedy. Order. I give the call to the member for Blair.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Financial Services. How is the government protecting consumers without stifling innovation in the buy now, pay later industry?
Give the call to the Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services.
Thanks, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for Blair for his question. There is not a harder working or more decent member of parliament in this place. I want to acknowledge his long,
on my left.
hard-working commitment as a lawyer and as a member of parliament to providing rights and dignity for Australian
Members
people.
on my left will cease interjecting.
He asks about buy now, pay later. Now, buy now, pay later credit products are providing enormous innovation and competition in our credit markets. Over the last 12 months, you have seen a massive increase in the number of buy now, pay later accounts. 7 million accounts in Australia as of today, about $16 billion worth of payments flowing through the buy now, pay later sector. And as most Australians, if they walk into a shop today, they can see on the counter that you can pay for a product by cash, by Visa card, by MasterCard, and you'll also see a sign saying Zip Pay or Afterpay or a number of other buy now, pay later products. And therein lies the issue. Some of those products are regulated as credit products under the National Consumer Credit Act, and some of them are not. Some of them have rights for consumers, some of them do not. Now, we take the view that if something looks like a duck, walks like a duck and sounds like a duck, then it's probably a duck. And buy now, pay later is looking pretty ducky. We want to ensure that we can continue to have innovation and competition in the credit market, but we also want to ensure that credit and credit users and consumers are well protected. We will ensure that we have the right sort of consumer protections in place. It's why we have released this week a consultation paper inviting feedback from stakeholders to look at how we can better regulate buy now, pay later products in Australia. We're concerned about ensuring that the products are properly marketed to consumers, concerned to ensure that we aren't encouraging unaffordable lending practices, concerned to ensure that we have the appropriate levels of credit checks in place. We will receive consultation input from the market and from consumers and from stakeholders by December this year, with a view to ensuring that we can have regulation in place at some stage next year. Now, of course, Deputy Speaker, it is not just in buy now, pay later. There are many members in this place, including yourself, who have put a lot of effort into ensure that we can have appropriate regulation for payday lending. We have laws before this parliament to ensure that we can be regulating those areas of credit to ensure proper protection for consumers as well.
Give the call to the member for Monash.
Thank you for the call, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Small Business. Can the minister confirm to the House that under Labor's extreme industrial relations changes, small businesses such as a hardware store, a hairdresser, a cafe, a butcher could be compelled to bargain together with a large supermarket if they are located in the same shopping centre as that large supermarket?
Look, No, I don't want the question again. The question is clearly directed to the wrong minister. With industrial relations, I'm just saying if the minister chooses to have someone also supplement the answer because she's not directed for her responsibilities under the standing orders, I'll invite the minister. I'm not ruling the question out of order, but I'll invite the minister to take the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do thank the member opposite for his question. As I have said clearly in this place, more than 2 million businesses will be exempt from the single interest stream that the member is referring to in terms of the Industrial Relations Bill. Can we also remind
the Leader of the
House,
Opposition
Mr.
will cease
Speaker,
interjecting. The minister will be heard in silence, just as the member for Monash was heard in silence. The Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Opposition is warned. I can't be clearer. When a minister is on her feet, within barely seconds into the answer, it is unacceptable for the yelling, for the interjections, and give her the call.
And as I have said earlier in the week in this place, Mr Speaker, there are other thresholds that need to be met. And one of those is, of course, that the Fair Work Commission would need to say that they have the same single interest. And that would not be the case in the example that the member actually refers to.
Give a call to the member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to address mobile black spots and improve communications resilience?
Give the call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Hunter for his question. I recently had the pleasure of spending time with him and his electorate to see the range of communications initiatives benefiting the Hunter community. Mr Speaker, improving connectivity is a top priority for the Albanese government. High-quality, reliable communication services play a vital role for the economic and social inclusion of communities, and especially for safety for those living and working in regional Australia as well as in our outer suburbs. That's why Labor took to the election our Better Connectivity Plan for rural and regional Australia. And true to our commitment, our budget boosted regional telecommunications funding by $800 million compared to the last budget of the previous government. Now, a critical element of our plan is $400 million to expand mobile coverage and improve the resilience of mobile networks and communication systems during natural disasters. This stream includes $100 million dedicated to resilience measures, which will help deliver improvements to the reliability of networks and their ability to withstand and recover more quickly from natural disasters. Mr Speaker, it's useful to understand what this can mean in practice. Right now, as honourable members across the chamber are well aware, there are communities across the country who are in the midst of devastating floods. Many constituents of those honourable members will be struggling to connect to the internet or get a mobile signal to contact their loved ones, to call for help or to receive emergency information. Our resilience measures will help to remedy just that. This includes improved reliability of backup power sources for telco facilities, and these include innovative battery and solar solutions. We will also focus on increasing the diversity of transmission routes, meaning that critical sites will be connected to the network through more than one path. So if one path fails, it's less likely to bring down the entire site. My department has also commenced consultation on the Improving Mobile Coverage round of the Mobile Black Spots program, and this progresses our election commitments to address mobile coverage and capacity issues in 54 locations where inadequate service had been identified by communities, local councils and mobile carriers. And, Mr Speaker, we committed $39.1 million to further rounds of the Peri-Urban Mobile program, which will deliver increased coverage and capacity in our rapidly growing outer suburban areas. Our investment will also expand the program to urban areas with a population of over 100,000, and these include areas like Geelong, Wollongong, Cairns and Newcastle. Mr Speaker, the Albanese government is committed to better connectivity for Australians because good connectivity isn't simply a nice-to-have. It is an essential service for our economy, our quality of life and, most of all, for the safety of our citizens.
The call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper. And, Mr
Order.
Speaker, can I acknowledge the 32 members of the ADF parliamentary program that have been working with MPs and senators here this week? They're up there in the gallery. I think it's appropriate if all members give them a bit of a thank you. I thank you for your service this week, but more importantly, I thank you for your service in defence of our nation.
The member for Herbert has asked for the call.
Thanks, Speaker. Mr Speaker, on a matter of indulgence, I seek leave to make a personal explanation.
Does the member claim to be misrepresented? Or are you seeking to correct the record?
Correct the record. Not misrepresented, correct the record, Speaker. Mr Speaker, during the MPI yesterday, I quoted an article from a think tank which cited statistics from Save the Children regarding the number of children living in Syrian camps. While the figure of 7,300 children was correctly quoted, I have since been informed that Save the Children their position is not that these children are under the guardianship of their ISIS-affiliated mothers who are indoctrinating them with ISIS ideology and instilling in them the desire to avenge their fathers who were killed or taken prisoner in battle. It was indicated in the think tank article, and this is a matter between the think tank and Save the Children. For transparency, I'm preempting the outcome and I'd like to correct the record.
thank the member. The member for Hume has indicated that he wishes to do a personal explanation. Then I'll call the member for Fadden on a similar order. Am I right? I'll call the member for Hume.
I seek leave to make a personal explanation, Mr.
Do you
Speaker.
claim to be misrepresented?
Most grievously.
You may proceed.
In question time yesterday, the Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations misrepresented me, suggesting that I don't support wage increases when I do. The Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations has made similar comments in this place on the 26th of...
You resume your seat. You don't have to call. You've made the point where you've been misrepresented. Yeah. Order. Members on my right, the Treasurer. The House will come to order. Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting, and I will hear the member for Fadden in silence. I give the call to the member for Fadden.
I seek leave to make a personal explanation.
Do you claim to be misrepresented?
Oh, most egregiously, Mr. Speaker.
You may
most
proceed.
Egregiously, with respect to the article in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, when I was on the backbench 6 years ago, I reject outright the accusations and the innuendo, as I do those of the member for Maribyrnong raised today. With respect to when I was a minister years later, all ministers know the process for procurement, all understand how procurement's run by the public service and how procurement is run. Having said that, the member for Maribyrnong and I are on Q&A tonight, which may well have informed his motivations, and I look forward to taking the stage. You may resume your seat.
Order. Order. I appreciate members are entitled under the standing orders to claim whether misrepresented. For the benefit of all members, when we come back next week, I will explain very clearly on Monday the precise way of doing that, because there are too many examples where people are taking advantage of that standing order. And I remind all members, when it comes to misrepresentation, to follow practice. Give the call to the Leader of the House will resume his seat. The member for Petrie is claiming.
No. I'd like clarification from you as Speaker in relation to Standing Order 90.
The member will resume his seat. Is the member asking me a question? The time to do that is immediately post-question time. And on administration, not standing orders. So if you have a question regarding standing orders, I'm happy for you to write to me and I'll respond to the member directly. Give the call to the Leader of the House.
Speaker, documents are tabled in accordance with the list circulated to honourable members today. Full details of the documents will be recorded in the votes and proceedings.